Hello, welcome back to Unbelievable for another one of our school's debates. I'm your host, Andy Kind, and today we're talking about AI, a popular topic at the moment, and how it relates to ethics. I've been joined again by, on my left, Dr Alex Carter from Cambridge University, and on my right, Dr Amna Whiston from Oxford University. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hi, Andy. Yeah, hi. Yes, hi. Yeah, we've spoken before on AI, specifically regarding creativity. We're looking at ethics today. But Anna, let's start with you. Can you just, for people who haven't tuned into Unbelievable before, and some people in the room, can you give an idea of what AI is? What do we mean and what don't we mean by AI?
From a philosophical perspective, what do we mean by artificial intelligence? As the word says, it's artificial. So we use the term intelligence just to describe something that is similar to human intelligence, but it has some common, denominators, factors similar, but it's essentially it doesn't have human capacity to follow rules. Human capacity to think of their actions and more generally conduct as meaningful, human capacity for emotions and feelings, etc. So it is just a tool that we use that can be usefully used, that can be misused, a tool that is in a constant state of evolving and more sophisticated, and with that comes positives and negatives, obviously, that we're going to discuss about, but essentially it is a technological tool that we use. It's a kind of modern slavery, I would say. Yeah. It's a modern slave that we justify for our own purposes.
Yeah, but Alex, it's not sentient. I think we had I think it was Anil Seth. Do you know him?
I do.
Yeah, so I think he said when he was on the show, we need to understand it's not intelligent, it's applied statistics. So it's essentially a very fast-moving spreadsheet.
I like to put it this way, it's thinking the noun, not thinking the verb.
Yeah.
So it's thinking at a distance. So we all think and we can all hyper-rationalize and so on, but we can also not think, right? We can sit by and we can act, we can do things without thinking, and AI cannot. So it's automatically starting with this kind of set of logical data points, this information, this code that we've given it, and it operates entirely as it's intended to operate, but intended by us, not intended by the AI itself, as Amna was saying.
So let's stay with you, Alex. Let's talk about ethics, and maybe we need to sort of give some context to what we mean by ethics. So if you could start with that, and then talk about why we're even asking about AI and ethics. In what way would AI be an ethical question?
Okay, so let me start by saying that there's one aspect of ethics which I find isn't talked about enough, and it's the fact that originally ethics was about how should we live. So should we learn? Should we join the military? Should we be married? Should we have families? Should we farm? Should we be connected with the earth? All these kinds of things. It's a very basic question. It's a fundamental question. How should we live our lives, period? We've now turned it into more of a discussion about normative ethics, which is what is the right thing to do in a given circumstance? So what's the correct answer to an ethical question like, the classic example of the trolley problem, should I pull a lever that would result in a single person dying or allow a tram to continue on moving and kill 5 people? So allowing 5 to die or killing 1. Unpleasant example, and by the way, a problem no human being will ever face. Why? Because this is exactly how anyone would respond to that problem.
Yeah.
That's how we should respond, and that's the correct response, by the way.
Also a bit thin on the ground, trams these days, aren't they?
They are. Trolleys even more so, and not threatening ones anyway. So the trolley problem, I think, is a misuse of ethics. It's this attempt to come up with a problem that's soluble. But the point of ethics is that it isn't meant to be soluble. It's meant to be, you must do A, you must do B, you can only do 1. So you're automatically going to do something wrong. That's a situation that you'll find yourself in. So that's the kind of engagement with ethics that we need to have. How can you respond to a problem where you're going to be wrong?
Yeah. So that's what ethics is. It's about coming to a place where we say, this is what must be done.
It's about recognizing duties, expectations, things that we're called to do that would be the right thing to do, but also navigating the situation where we might have to perform one wrong, which might be a lesser wrong, or it might be a situation where we have to pick between right actions.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Amna, why are we talking about AI and ethics? If it's just code, if it's just applied statistics, how does that link with the idea of making ethical choices?
So as Alex articulated very nicely the point about the good living, Aristotelian sort of ancient Greek kind of ideal of good living, involved amongst other things the notion of friendship. So this is just one illustration. So Aristotelian friendship is human-to-human friendship. So one of the problems is that our attitudes it's not so much what AI is, what they can create, for example, but it's what it does to us. And what is possible to happen is that we are going to start valuing human-to-human relationships comparatively less than valuing the human-to-social robot relationship, because social robots can never lie to me, for example. My friend will do. So this is one of the illustrations why we should be worried about, from ethical point of view, about our attitudes changing as a result of these sophisticated machines, including social robots, like I said.
Right. Anything to add to that, Alex?
Only to say, so the example that I mentioned of the trolley problem is literally being used right now to design driverless cars. So we have machines that are being powered by AI that are being designed in a certain way to move and resolve ethical dilemmas in a particular way. So when I said we would panic if we were put in a trolley problem situation, the car won't panic, it will just make a choice. And I would argue that if it makes the right choice, it's a monster. And if it makes a wrong choice, it's a monster. Because it's not about choosing. It's not about the rational side of things. I said AI can only think. So again, it's turning the ethics into this space of just correct answers and incorrect answers. So my view is that the AI ethics is quite pronounced, because we're using AI now, we're actually applying it now, but we're applying it with mistaken ways of thinking about what is correct or incorrect, ethically speaking. And again, philosophers are to blame for this, by the way. It's our fault. We're the ones who have come up with all these different theories.
Yeah, and we talked in our previous conversation about whether AI is actually ever able to feel and have a sort of sentience. Does that play into this question of ethics? We talk about human beings and our feelings and emotions. Is there an ethical side to where AI might end up?
Having feelings,
Yeah.
having pain. Regardless of what the answer is, and this is connected to a brief conversation Alex and I had yesterday, we have to distinguish between two things. One is what we're responsible for, and what are our obligations, in other words, on the one hand, and what are rights. So a thing, an entity, may not have rights, such as artificial intelligence. We still have an obligation towards it, not because it has rights. So regardless of how we conceive of AI, whether it has feelings or it doesn't have feelings, we have to be clear about that, not confuse these issues and say, I can't hurt my robot because it will suffer. And, robot has rights to not be abused by me. So these are kind of the areas we need to be really keep apart, so and sort it out conceptually.
There's also a severe risk to creating an AI that has feelings, because if you've watched Black Mirror, you'll know that the pain and the suffering can be infinite. We can create a system that can suffer on a level of suffering that we can't comprehend or even imagine. So we need to be really careful about what we do in the AI space. Luckily, I think it's impossible to create an AI that feels anything. But if it was possible, it would be terrifying.
Well, it might be.
On this, we may differ.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. So I want to talk about where we might end up. But to this point now, June 2025, what have been the sort of the key changes around ethical thinking as it pertains to AI? Have there already things been put in place in philosophy, in ethics, as a result of how AI has developed so far?
So there's a lot of work being done. There are philosophers in government, believe it or not. There's a wonderful philosopher in government called Honora O'Neill who works in this space and tries to establish what rules we should be following when it comes to technology. So she gives a wonderful talk on this, and I don't want to ruin her talk for anyone who might ever see it, but she talks about Socrates and his distaste for the written word, right? This new technology comes along, the written word. If you're walking down the street and you find a stone and it's got these things scrawled in it, these inscriptions scratched in it, you'll be suspicious of this. It could just be directions to Thebes, but it could also be a curse damning you. So he was very suspicious of this technology. And he was probably right, because what did his best pupil do but turn him into a mouthpiece? He turned him into a figure of yes, we don't know anything, Socrates thought, unless it comes to us through someone else. Anyway, so my point is that kind of comparison of a technology we're very familiar with, like the written word, can actually have implications for how we understand modern technology. Another, even perhaps more obvious example would just be privacy. No one can peek over your garden fence without, incurring issues of privacy. But when it comes to data, the camera on your computer turning on, recording your voice, recording your video, recording your keystrokes, checking your internet history, all of that stuff can be shared more easily than we realize. And also, one of my students, very interesting, she's researching the topic of the privacy of infants who might be using a tablet and not realizing the camera's turned on just because they've been mashing buttons. And they might then be filmed. And it might be that companies are harvesting all this data from young minds to say, well, how can we influence and shape these young minds? Well, that's now having implications well beyond that. So there's ethical implications all around privacy and around our data collection. And one last example would be intellectual property. So the reason I'm smirking is because as a Wittgensteinian, I'm in a difficult position anyway, because my entire career is based upon intellectual property. I own my own ideas. But Wittgenstein says, no, you don't. You can't, because ideas exist out here. They're a public space, and we kind of grab them and make use of them. This is why Darwin and Wallace could both come up with evolution at the same time, or natural selection at the same time. That's why Leibniz and Newton were accused of plagiarizing each other, because they both came up with calculus at the same time. But it's because it's the time when those ideas would come about. But AI can now just replicate all these ideas so quickly and so fast that it would just be all these ideas are available. So someone could become the ultimate patent troll and patent every single idea that's possible for someone to come up with, run it through an algorithm and just say, that's mine now. So ownership of data, ownership of property. And interestingly, AI is built on the same intellectual property that it undermines.
Explain that.
So I'm not allowed to know Google's algorithm code.
Yeah.
They won't tell me, but they can use Stephen Fry's voice and other people's voices in replicating a human voice. So they will just go through the Harry Potter series and listen to Stephen Fry reading it and say that's what a British upper class voice will sound like. So we'll just take that and replicate it. He's suing them for that very reason. So Google have their propriety, they have their intellectual property we can't access, but they can make use of other people's intellectual property seemingly willy-nilly, and we're not quite sure where the line needs to be drawn. So we have a problem.
What about you, Amna, on intellectual property?
Well, I don't have a qualified opinion like Alex does about what is a problem with intellectual property and who owns the rights to what, and what constitutes a plagiarism, because the lines are becoming so blurred, and it is very difficult to discern a genuine piece from a piece that is heavily plagiarized, because there is so much around. It's just like in literature. We have contemporary literature that is very difficult to kind of say, oh, this is really original, it hasn't been done before. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to own anything like that, intellectual kind of right to some piece of writing, and not least because obviously the use of artificial intelligence to produce piece of music or piece of writing or whatever. So it is very difficult to answer. So I'm afraid have as good answer as Alex does on these questions, and I don't have an opinion about why is it an ethical problem, not least because we have so many other problems in this area.
Do you think
that seems very marginal?
Yeah. Do you think either of you that there might be a sort of not wholesale, but widespread rejection of technology as AI gets more and more invasive, more and more seemingly clever. We talked about the Luddites in our previous discussion. But do you think we might see people retreating in vast numbers from technology because of just how mind-blowing the technology is?
Well, let me begin by defending the Luddites a little bit, because I've been accused of being one. I am a pessimist, but I think the pessimists are incredibly useful. They will improve AI. The people who critique technology are the ones who are calling for its better use. I'm not calling for it. There is no way anyone is going to stop AI and its proliferation.
And that's the fear.
Maybe. And but since we can't stop it, the question now is what's responsible use of it? And so if we can't use it responsibly, then we're in dire straits. But there are responsible uses that we can make of it. So for instance, when I've suggested taking AI out of education, I've been accused of saying, well, they said the same thing about the calculator, to which I respond, that the calculator was banned for 10 years after its first creation because they had exams that were set up for people to do arithmetic. So what's the point of giving them an exam on arithmetic with a calculator? They're not going to learn anything. They're not going to test their knowledge. They're not going to demonstrate any knowing. So now we have AI, and it's the ultimate calculator for complex thoughts and ideas. So we need to ban it for a while until we have fixed education. And by fixed education, I mean something fundamental needs to change in education for the good, which would change our focus away from standardizing everything, making everyone very similar to each other, teaching everyone to write algorithmically and then replacing them with an algorithm.
Yeah.
Instead, we need humans to be humans. We need humans to take their special qualities and make use of those. So education is just one example of that. But jobs are increasingly becoming that kind of thing where people say, I turn up to work and I do my job. But if it's not a profession like medicine or teaching or law or something like this, it is just these jobs that don't have a set sense of purpose. And there's a lot of discussion going on about that at the moment because we're in, quote unquote, a meaning crisis. People's lives feel less full of meaning. And I think one reason for that is we don't have that sense of a belonging to a job, belonging to a way of life. And AI is sort of chipping away at that. Well, she's sledgehammering away at that. So we need to think about how we're going to implement this properly.
Yeah.
I mean, you both have a point. You, Alex, have a point, very important one. That it's obviously we can't stop these developments. Nothing can stop it. But also, you said something earlier about the possible feeling of saturation, and that will then cause some kind of reaction and people retreating from, like, I don't know if any of you guys have tried to be without a mobile phone. I've listened on the Radio 4 the other day, these two girls who tried to do exactly that. And they felt amazing. They felt great after that, like a sense of accomplishment, like they'd done something, And these kind of, cases are perhaps not isolated and will maybe run parallel with this kind of steep kind of progression of artificial intelligence, that there will be, people who will just want to retreat and experience something different and have a sense of accomplishment, achievement without without that kind of aid, artificial aid.
Because we've got this idea of the race to the middle.
That's a great.
It's a good phrase. I heard it somewhere before. Obviously, we're trying to, people, not me personally, but people trying to improve AI, but just in society in general, people are using AI, which is actually dumbing and dulling their own creative abilities. Am I right in thinking that's what the race to the middle is? That actually we're lowering ourselves to the middle rather than trying to drag AI up to our level? Because you do see it. You see it in essays that are submitted by pupils. You see it in public talks. You see it in books that are available on Amazon, for instance, and you can tell there's that uncanny nature of stuff, and it's not real creativity. So do you want to explain a bit about the dehumanizing or decreatifying?
And also relating that to ethics as well, because I think it does the same thing in ethics. We don't look for the same sort of creative solutions to our problems that we looked for before. So we'll say, I need to find a theory that backs up my position. So that's typically what ethics is about now. It's not about a kind of wholesome, holistic, complete way of living. It's much more, I need to find a theory that will justify the particular action that I'm going to take anyway. Reason has been like that for a long time, by the way. So, as in, the nature of reason we often assume is I reason what I'm going to do and then I take action. Typically what actually we're going to do, we decided that we're going to act. I'm going on holiday. And then we come up with all the reasons why I should and why I shouldn't afterwards. And as long as we don't veto it, as long as we don't find a very good reason not to, we'll go. So actually the action was long since determined and reason acted as a kind of check or guide. And that's what ethics has all been about. So it's interesting, though, that in the moment, what are we supposed to do? What if I perform an action right now that hasn't required prior thought? Is it ethical? Is it unethical? What's the status of that? And then we'll apply a theory after the fact. And this is problematic because it's removing that quintessentially human thing of that kind of moral intuition, that we live a moral life. We see it, we know it. There's a philosopher, J.L. Mackie, who said, any theory you come up with for ethics will ultimately be checked by our intuitions about ethics. I already know that it's wrong. If I see a grown man punching a child, I don't need to find out what their reasons are. I already know it's wrong. There's no question what they can't say, oh, but I'm doing it because, no, I'm sorry, this is wrong. Whereas if someone said, oh, the reason it's wrong is because read Kant and you'll see this complete account of what's right and what's wrong. No, I didn't need that. I quintessentially didn't need that. So the intuition, the intuitive reactions that we have in the moment, this is largely where our moral sentiments come from, what our moral sentiments are all about. And I know that moral sentimentalism is not popular in philosophy, but the point is it still maintains that idea that I'm living with a dilemma. I must do A, I must do B, I can only do one. I feel the pain of that. There isn't then this idea of imposing a theory on it that will give me an answer. Just really quickly, there was a student that came to Jean-Paul Sartre and said, I'm my mother's carer. I'm looking after my mother at the moment, but the Nazis have invaded our country. I want to go and fight for my country. So do I go and fight for my country or do I stay at home and look after my mother? Which of these two should I do? And Sartre says, you've got radical choice. He said, but that's no use. I already knew that. That was why I had the problem. To which he then said, okay, well then let's have a look at Kant. Don't treat anyone as a means to an end. Well, if I look after my mother, my compatriot's suffering is a means to that end. If I go and fight for my country, my mother's suffering is a means to that end. So Kant, sorry, you're useless, goodbye. Utilitarians, this would be easier, right? Utilitarians, because it's about the number involved. There's more compatriots than there are mothers. I've only got one mother and I've got lots of compatriots, so I should go and fight for my country. But hang on a sec, I'm 100% of my mother's care and only 0.01% of the army. So maybe I should stay at home and look after my mother. Which number's bigger? So again, these theories, the whole problem with them is that they're looking for a correct answer to a problem that doesn't have one. So that's where moral intuition comes in. So AI in the race to the middle is essentially AI is making us think it's okay to just always be coming up with a theory that backs up our point. So as long as we're defensible, we can do whatever we want. And we're leading to this kind of moral gray area in the middle where you can get away with it as long as you've got a theory to support what you've got to do. And I promise you can find any theory to support any action. Yeah.
What about you, Amna, on that? Because as a moral philosopher yourself, I mean, this is an area of extreme interest for you.
So again, there are things that we need to separate out. One is meta-ethical questions, the questions about what is goodness itself and what are we doing when we're making moral judgments? Are we expressing our sentiments, like moral sentimentalists insist on, or are we expressing cognitive states, namely beliefs? And if we are expressing beliefs, then what explains the fact that we are typically motivated by our moral judgments? Hence the cognitivists, as Alex might agree, have a more problem in explaining moral motivation than sentimentalists. So moral sentimentalism, correct, it's not as popular as it used to be, but it's evolving into something called neo-sentimentalism. And it's just a kind of this attempt, meta-ethical attempt to work with the idea of belief, but to somehow import in this belief something else, motivational. So it's a bit a cop-out, but yeah, at least that's the best they can do. So these are the meta-ethical questions. The normative questions, which is a separate part of ethics, are the questions of what is the right course of action. So utilitarians, as Alex said before, according to utilitarians, the right kind of action is an action that will maximize utility or happiness, whatever it might be. Whereas Immanuel Kant's kind of deontologist would say what feels right intuitively, what is the right thing to do regardless of the consequences. And then Aristotelian as a third option is whatever is a virtuous thing to do. Whatever the virtuous agents would do would be the right thing to, never mind, what does that mean? It's because it seems circular. But anyway, so these are the three possible options on the table. And then we have applied ethics, and these are the questions about whether euthanasia, should be legalized, etc. So these are the specific questions that applied ethics deal with. When it comes to artificial intelligence, so there is a kind of like not just philosophical accounts, but also lots of empirical research that comes up with this idea about we do post hoc rationalization because when we respond to these the trolley dilemmas, it depends how the case is presented to us. If you present the switch case, are you familiar with the trolley dilemmas, most of you? So there's a fundamental difference between switch and the footbridge. So if you present, in whichever order you present, there will be different responses. So this is kind of empirical research that produces evidence about how we reason, and what matters to us. Is it deontological reasoning or is it utilitarian? And they wrestle with these questions, but ultimately these philosophical questions are unresolved. There is no agreement about what is it that we care about, and so until and unless we sort out these conceptual grounds, we cannot prescribe to policymakers or to whoever it might be more concrete and specific advices or questions about what should we do about driverless cars. Well, who says, what points of, what normative ethical position do you hold? Who should the driverless car defend? The driver, or should it save 5 people on the road? These are things that are not resolved. We don't know exactly what is it that we care about as a society, as a country, as a human beings at all. So it's an open question, and it's.
There's also inertia in the technology itself. So for instance, imagine if you said we want to protect those infants from being seen on camera. What should we do? Well, we'll just make it so that you have to opt in to being seen on camera. Or you make it, but then the little child could press opt in without intending to. They might just hit the button. So now you can't do that either. So now you have to come up with a very complex system of how you make sure that the camera can turn itself on. So maybe you just ban it. But the problem is, there's money in that technology, so they're not going to just let you ban it. Likewise, the driverless car thing. If we make the engineers who build the AI responsible for everything that code is used to do, you can have unexpected code. You can have code that's about choosing sushi from a sushi table, but some company then turns that into a weapon and says, oh, we're going to choose between combatants and non-combatants using the same code. What does that engineer do? Do they accept responsibility for having done that? So it's kind of like it spirals out of control. And so it's almost like people don't want to resolve this, and they want there to be a kind of constructive ambiguity around a lot of the ethics. So philosophers have argued about it for thousands of years, but we have agreed on some things. And
we have
those
converged
things
on some ideas, but that is in support of cognitivism. The very idea we have converged.
Cognitivism being the idea that the moral statements can be true or false.
And that moral judgments express beliefs rather than...
Sure. In terms of moral cognitivism, sorry, is what I meant. But the idea of, and the issue with that is if moral statements are not true or false, for instance, if I say, don't hit your sister, and what that means is something like shut the door, right? It's a command, not a description. So it can't be true or false. And if it's not true or false, then how would you encode a machine with that information? So first of all, you're assuming that moral cognitivism is true, in order to develop moral machines. And that's what they're trying to do, because they would rather that the machine was responsible for any moral harm than the engineer or the company. So they prefer that situation. So that's the position that has become constructively placed before us.
But John Mackey is a cognitivist, but he's a realist. So John Mackey would say that moral judgments do express beliefs, but there is no moral truth. So we're always misfiring. Basically, we are making moral judgments that are expressing our genuine beliefs. The fact of the matter is there is nothing out there. It's just there's no truth about what is right or wrong.
And what's beautiful is that his theory is called error theory, which I like the idea. If you gave a moral dilemma to a machine, it would just go error.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because as we try to sort of program AI to act in the right way and decide what is right and wrong for AI, we can't escape the fact that human beings have all these different theories of justice and worth and value and behavior. It seems like we're just giving ourselves a new extra level of problems. It's like having another child when you've already got a family of 9 and trying to hand down clothing. So, question for you both: what's the best case and worst case scenario on the timeline that we're on the trajectory that we're on with AI and ethics? Do you want to do best case or worst case? And Amna will do the other.
Oh, go on, I'll go worst case.
Okay, worst case. Do you want to start with best case, Amna? So 20 years from now, best case scenario with the development of AI.
It unlocks the potentials of many people who feel trapped in some way or another. In other words, there are lots of people with ideas, including creative ideas, ideas about how to make this world a better place, ideas about how to produce a piece of art, all sorts of ideas, but they feel somehow they need an additional help that doesn't come from a teacher, from a parent, or from a friend. So the best case scenario would be the case where the artificial intelligence can unlock these potentials of some of these people who feel in the way that I described.
Like a walking stick almost, a sort of creative walking stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. Come on then, Dr. Carter, worst case scenario, 20 years from now, are we all up in flames?
20 years from now, I doubt very much that we'll have something like Isaac Asimov's worst case scenario, which was an AI which authoritatively controls everything in our lives.
Yeah.
Arguably, we might be there already with kind of authoritative systems telling us what to do. But I have a lot of young people I know who were very interested in the idea that there should be an authority in charge. And if we can make it someone who has not got toxic issues in their personality and kind of difficulties around that, but make it an AI, I can imagine people sort of embracing that as an idea. So I think worst case scenario is we are all within a system being managed beautifully and wonderfully well by an AI.
Managed how? Morally managed?
In the broadest definition of the ethics that I talked about before, how should we live? The AI answers that question and directs every action that we perform in, you shouldn't eat that, that's bad for you, you need to eat this, you've been given this little chit that will allow you to get this particular bit of food at this particular bit of time. Now the idea is that will lead to us having perfect lives, and I cannot think of anything worse, because the problem is we'll never stop it. We'll be too comfortable and we'll like it.
Because so much of human progress has been built on imperfection. WD-40, that thing that your granddad uses in the garage, it's called WD-40 because the first 39 attempts failed. He got it right on the 40th attempt. So much of what it means to be human is in the imperfection.
And even better, the 57th variety of ketchup that Heinz uses, they just made that number up. They liked the number 57.
Oh, right.
So I like that one too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. That's worst case scenario. Is that a possible thing that we all end up as essentially automatons in a Ray Bradbury short story?
Well, we're just playing with these words, create, manage, do, believe, not believe, but I just cannot think. I have a conceptual sort of barrier when I try to think about that predicament, that we can be managed by an AI. So I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic, and in the sense of whether that could ever actually.
I was asked to be pessimistic, so that was me being pessimistic.
Yeah,
I
but
hope
you
that's
sold it
better.
very well,
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
don't
yeah,
mind me
yes.
saying.
But I think a happy dystopia, that's the problem, isn't it? Because an unhappy dystopia is one we change. A happy dystopia is one we keep. And I think that's the bigger threat.
Yeah, like in The Time Machine, where he goes forward in time, and they're so happy, and the person falls into the river and flows away to drown, and they just carry on eating their apples. Yeah, I don't want that. Well, it's all very depressing. We do want to have questions from the audience. So we're looking at AI, creativity, ethics. It all sounds very Black Mirror and very sci-fi, doesn't it? So ask anything about that. If you want to know whether cyborgs are going to take over, that's fine as well. There's no question off limits here. Okay, great question. Linking back to what we were saying about the calculator. The calculator was invented and then banned for 10 years and finally embraced. And the worst thing that happens with the calculator, as any teenage boy knows, is when you turn it upside down. But that's really worst case scenario. So the question was, can we do a similar thing with AI? Is it the right thing to, not delay ourselves, but to take it on now, bearing in mind, of course, that worst case scenario is a lot worse than with a calculator?
I'm not sure if calculator is really analogous to something like I mentioned before, social robot, because social robot can be treated as a friend in a way in which calculator cannot, because you can just use a calculator, use hammer, literally use it, whereas you expect some kind of emotional reward if you have a social robot. So it's kind of not quite the same, I would think. But maybe Alex has...
Well, just on the point about education, I totally agree with you. This needs to be the future, but the thing is, we're too slow. The human part of this equation is the problem. We need to get humans up to speed in developing courses where we're inviting you to use AI, just as we invite you to use a calculator. No one's working out cosine in their head, right? So we ask you to use a calculator now in mathematics because it makes you better mathematicians. You can do more. We should be asking you to use AI so you can do more. But whenever I ask people, what does that more look like in education? The answer invariably is something like, oh, it makes them faster. So is that better? If I watch a football match on double speed, is it a better match? If I eat a meal in half the time, is it a better meal? So again, speed doesn't necessarily seem to me to be selling it. So I want something to sell it. I need to be able to understand what should my curriculum look like, which embraces AI and develops it to the next stage. And I suppose we also need to know, what does the workplace look like? But to Amna's point about the broader social impact of this is because we use calculators elsewhere as well. We also will use AI elsewhere as well to replace friends, to replace partners, to replace business colleagues and all these kinds of things. And it would just be a tool that's replacing lots of human beings. And the question then is, so what are we all doing with our time? So again, we don't have an answer to that question either yet, so that we can be enthused and optimistic about AI. And the reason I'm pessimistic about AI is because I'm optimistic about humans. So that's the offset balance. But if we're optimistic about AI, it's often because we're pessimistic about humans. We think, oh, humans are rubbish. Let's just replace them all. There's so much quicker, easier, cheaper to have a workforce of AI than it is to have a workforce of people always moaning about the canteen and so on. So, that's the problem.
And what you were saying earlier, that because I made the point in the previous debate that it seems like AI has sort of shot forward in its qualitative state. But you actually made a point about how it hasn't changed in its quality since the 70s when it was first brought about. The only thing that's changed is that rapidity, is that speed at which it works.
So AI in the 1970s, when it was developed to solve a children's puzzle, the AI specialist who designed that said, AI basically is the same now. It's just much, 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 much faster. Or there's elements of it that we simply don't understand. Like quantum computing, for instance, we don't actually know how it works, but it's in everyone's phone. If you've got a modern phone, it's a quantum working phone. It involves quantum physics in the design of the chip, because the chip uses 3 nanometer and it's very close together, and so quantum influences are part of the chip. We don't know how it works, we only know that it works. So it could be conscious, for instance, and we wouldn't know. So there are quantitative leaps. Maybe there are qualitative ones. We don't know what they are, but it's more the use of it. We can get the ChatGPT model was the great breakthrough because it enabled us to talk to the data for the first time. It created an interface between us and the data, utilizing the data to actually reflect back at us our own thinking. But the biggest danger, the reason for the race to the middle is the biggest problem we have is that AI is not generative, it is regenerative. If you all go on the internet and start typing in, I have an itch in my tentacle, and enough people do this, an AI will think that human beings have tentacles, just because it has no way of checking except the data you've just given it. So it doesn't live in the world we live in, and so it's this idea of kind of we're racing to reach a point where agreement matters because it's agreement with systems that already agree with each other. We're just trying to iron out any kind of disagreements, and that doesn't seem like a goal we want to achieve.
Yeah, fantastic question. So how would we differentiate between intellectual property made by AI and something created by a person who has been influenced by AI itself, Amna?
It is, I think, in the public domain. It's decided by the public. Whatever is part of the custom tradition is going to decide rather than something more intrinsic. There's no other way of measuring this success other than there is a consensus of this is what it is, I think.
I'm less sure about the nature of the distinction because, for instance, no AI is just producing something because it wants to, right? It's always given an intent by a person. But I take the point that, for instance, someone can work with AI. And one of my colleagues who works in the field of audiovisual use of AI says the longer you work with it, the better the product. And so essentially it kind of ups your game. And this is what we were talking about as this kind of hybridization of human and AI thinking and development of ideas. There was a really interesting case, though, not quite related to creative industries, but it's an interesting case within the law. There was a tax decision that was sent, it couldn't be more boring, could it, as an opener? There was a tax decision sent to an Australian taxpayer saying, you must pay this much tax. He paid it. They then said, whoops, the AI gave you the wrong figure. We need to actually get you to pay a little bit more tax. And then the legal case started. Did the person get a decision from the tax office? Because if they got a decision, that's the only one they needed to pay. And two judges said there was no decision because it was just an AI that produced it. And the third judge, the dissenting judge, won the other two over by saying, no. A decision is an output. A decision is the letter that he received. If I ask someone, which of these do you want? And they just pick one up, I don't know if they decided. How am I to tell? I can't look inside their mind and see that there was a process of deciding. They just picked one up. I'll call that a decision. So the issue with lots of these terms, as I say, I'm a philosopher of language, so I always look at the language that we're using, is deeply problematic. It's like what's AI produced and what's not AI produced. If I use Google to try and find some ideas from Soren Kierkegaard, who predates AI and predates Google, have I used AI? I guess so, because Google has identified sources. It may have even come up with this little Gemini answer to answer, oh, he thinks this about this. So we almost don't know now where AI is being utilized in spaces. I guess what we're saying is we can tell by the product quite often, but increasingly we can't. And I suppose the issue then becomes, again, what do we want human beings to be doing and what do we want AI to be doing? And as I say, I don't think I want creative industries ruled by AI. That feels like the wrong place to be using AI. That's not its skill set.
Okay, another really good question. Fantastic set of questions today. Do you think that AI will ever be used in court cases, I suppose, as a kind of independent arbiter is what the question is going at, where maybe the judges are split and we're looking for a third party and we use AI. So is there a place for that in the future?
I don't see why not. But then that doesn't commit me to a moral statement, namely saying that it should, that it is morally right to do that, because legal issues are always separate from moral issues. So it may be more efficient, the justice might be better delivered, but that doesn't mean it's morally justifiable. Just like many cases, in many cases something could be legally right, but it doesn't necessarily follow that it is morally justifiable. It just means that the justice is served better with the use of AI, possibly.
We currently have legal clerks in lower courts, and I could totally imagine an AI stepping in there to offer answers to stipulations about legal statutes. Find me a precedent that supports this idea, or is this lawyer quoting the precedent correctly, and so on. I could imagine those sorts of questions getting asked. There was an interesting case, not quite law, but in medicine. They found that patients would rather be treated by a doctor that they knew was 68% accurate, rather than an AI that was 85% accurate. And they wondered about this, like, why would people rather risk their health and therefore their lives with an AI that is more accurate? Why would they risk their life with a doctor who is less accurate than an AI which is more accurate? And I worked this out. I puzzled it through, and I thought, I think I know why. It's because I don't want to be killed by a rounding error.
Yeah.
And I imagine the same answer would be given, I don't want to go to jail for life for a rounding error.
But a doctor can look you in the eye as he gives you his decision. They're
on your side.
There's something called compassion, isn't there?
Yeah.
Which we've established at the moment AI cannot possess.
No.
And maybe this is irrational, right? And it's perfectly possible that it's irrational, or maybe it's non-rational. Maybe it's just, this is how we live our lives. It's perfectly natural to want to live your life that way. When I ask my students, if I say to them, you're writing your essays by AI, I'm going to end up marking them by AI. How would that make you feel? Because we could just give you your award the minute you turn up. You could just say, well, hello, this is me. And they go, okay, well, then this is a ChatGPT essay on the question that we've set. And here's your mark back. Oh, okay, you passed. Off you go. That doesn't seem like that's something that anyone would actually want to embrace. So again, the question is going to come back to this. What part of the law courts, or what part of medicine, or what part of education do we want to automate? And so far, the best answer I've heard is referencing in essays. When you get to university, everyone moans about the fact they have to reference everything.
When I write books, I refuse to reference anything. I have no appendices whatsoever. I don't want them. We've got time for probably one more question. Okay, a very apt question to probably finish with, as we are in a school, John Collett School here. And the final question is, what are your views on AI in education? Amna, take as long as you want over there.
Do you mean whether it is better to have an AI teacher than a human? Okay, so I turn that question back to you. What would you prefer, to have a human being as a teacher or AI teacher? Would you be inclined more or less to attend a lecture if it's given by an AI or human being? Human being. Well, I think we're in agreement that, and I think that most of you would agree on that, or not?
It'd be quite fun to have a robot, though, wouldn't it?
But
that would be fun.
As a novelty, maybe to try it out and see how it goes.
Yeah. But again, you'd worry if you were late, they'd just laser beam you or something, wouldn't they?
Well, they can't give you kind of...
Again, so your worst case scenario was nothing compared to mine, was it?
I guess so. I suppose the issue being you can't replace the students with AI, right? And that feels like a step too far, but I guess that won't be a step. Maybe in 20 years' time, that is the solution. We just have AIs coming to school and being schooled by AIs, and meanwhile you're at home, presumably playing Mario Kart or another...
Mario Kart 105 as it will be by that
possibly,
point.
yeah. It will still be going in 20 years.
Oh, definitely will. Yeah. Anything else on that? Because that's a fascinating one, isn't it? And
It is, yes.
So that sounded really, really pessimistic. I think AI can improve education, I do. AI can enhance education. It's just we don't yet know what that looks like. And I do think we need to work with students, we need to work with teachers, we need to work with lots of different people to work out what that looks like. But it's definitely not, wherever AI replaces human thought, that's a bad thing. So in education in particular, I think we need to be really careful.
But we've seen from the pandemic, and there's people who lived through the pandemic and missed school because of it, the impact that had on emotional well-being, on mental health, because of the lack of contact. And I think one of the great brilliant things that teachers do is have that human mentoring. And as we've said, AI can't mentor you to be human. It can just simply pass on information.
And I think that, imagine a lesson taught by an ethics class taught by an AI, which would say, the ethical thing to do in this situation is this, the ethical thing to do in this, it would be more kind of a factual, again, I'm going to get challenged on that, and specialists will say, no, we just replicate what a teacher would do in that situation. But again, that's still problematic because that doesn't push any boundaries. So much of what we're doing in philosophy is about co-creating and problematizing. So a student comes, say, this is my position. We make it more problematic. We throw spanners in the works. We make it harder for you to understand what the solution is going to be. And by that, you improve, right? And you're constantly pushed beyond your skill level, and that's how growth takes place. So we need to ensure student growth, and again, we need AI to be an accelerant of that, and I think it can be, but at the moment, I think it's not acting as an accelerant.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to Dr Amna Whiston and Dr Alex Carter from Oxford and Cambridge University, respectively. We've been here at John Colet School, somewhere in England, for Unbelievable. We've been talking about AI and the future and creativity and ethics. It's been fascinating and a fantastic audience as well. So join us again from everybody here at the Unbelievable team and me, the host, Andy Kind. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the future, unless, of course, AI has really taken over. The big reveal at the end is that Alex is actually fully AI and is about to go insane. Goodbye.